Hi, and welcome to The Fault Line, a CMG consulting podcast exploring the pivotal moments where business strategy meets real-world pressure. We're excited today. We're going to talk about pricing, how pricing can provide signals to all kinds of different stakeholders out there. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Kim to introduce our special guest.
Thanks, Gary. Today, we've got our colleague Ray Taylor with us, who is an expert in all things research and pricing. And Gary's statement of the very exciting topic of pricing is something that might only resonate with consultants, but we're going to give it a whirl and try to make things interesting and impactful for you today. Yes. So, Ray, I'll pass it over to you first to maybe give us a little bit of insight into the things that you find when working with clients on pricing signals and what they're looking for and what they see.
First, thanks for having me. And we, always are looking for, in a very kind of nerdy way, we're always looking for ways to talk about this because it's incredibly interesting, to me and my team to help clients, I think, navigate a really difficult spot. I mean, we work with a lot of clients in the B2C and the B2B space that, have, necessarily kind of constructed a reality for themselves where they've got, big installed bases and they're locked into, certain, and they just feel trapped because if they make any move at all, they're really risking, or at least they feel like they're risking a lot in their business. And pricing is an incredibly important lever in being able to kind of actualize or realize the value of your business kind of on an overarching basis. Helping clients kind of unlock opportunities using a pricing lever, taking full advantage of their brand power in the marketplace and their notoriety, their customer support, capabilities, like the full range of their strength is really a really gratifying activity and something that we're really proud of when we do it. So super excited to be here and talk about this. And I'm hopeful that I can convert some skeptical folks about whether or not pricing can be entertaining. That's my number one goal today.
The two things I just took away, first, you admitted you're a nerd, and secondly, you love pricing. So that's a particular kind of nerd. And I got to tell you, as a fellow member of the nerd community, I am super appreciative.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if we were here together, we could fist bump. We'll just do it, virtually.
We'll just do it this way.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to be the not nerd of the three of us, I suppose. Gary, anything to add to Ray's little intro so far?
I think there are a few themes that may come out as we talk about this. Pricing, and I think Ray alluded to this pretty directly. It's the rubber hits the road moment. The price we ask is the indicator of, is our value proposition worth your hard-earned dough? So that's when people have to make a choice. And therefore, it's fundamental to building the value of a business. I think a couple other themes that may come out, the idea of discrete pricing for different types of customers versus generalized pricing. And in some cases, how much influence the originator of a product or service has over ultimately what somebody's going to pay for it. Because in a lot of hard goods industries, original equipment manufacturers sell to a distributor who might then sell to a dealer who then sells to an end user or a business. And so there are layers there, and the ability to ultimately charge what you think is appropriate for your product may not be entirely in your hands. So that's one area of risk. And then, this idea of how scary the whole thing is and changes. There's a lot of misperception around the power of pricing and what can or could be done. And I don't want to go too far down into that rabbit hole right now. But as we think about the agency that different organizations have to change how they price, how they promote, how they capture value, that's really what this is all about, is capturing value for the product and services that are being provided.
As a non-pricing nerd, but a consumer of things, I think transparency in pricing is something that is a lot more available today from a B2C perspective, right? And the risk adversity, I think, is one that we hear our clients talk about often. So I'm interested in hearing more about that as we go throughout today's conversation. Ray, as you think about the different levers in pricing that a client or customer can pull, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I think when we are, kind of addressing these questions with our clients, we try to look at this in kind of like a 4-part package, right? It's level, structure, framing, and then the dynamics. And I think each one of them tells buyers, something different. And it's incredibly important that you're dialed in on where you've got kind of fidelity in your capability to kind of address needs. And where it's not as solid in any one of those 4 points is where you've got to focus the time and the attention. So what do I mean by level? That's the anchor, right? So your price level is going to communicate, confidence, meaning if I'm premium, right? If I'm at a premium price, then, that I'm anchoring people around a concept that, I know that the problem that I'm solving for you is costly, and I know that we're good at solving it. So if I'm going to underprice, a premium capable product, then that sends mixed signals, right? Because you're basically saying, I'm not really sure that you're going to pay what we think this is worth. And in a B2B space, that kind of self-doubt really just blows up win rates really quickly, right? There's a lot of decisiveness that exists in those channels. And those are places that you've got to be very sharp on what you mean and what you're communicating. So that's level. The second one is structure. And so that's, how's the offer built? The way you package your value, when you think about tiering, having packages and bundles, identifying how people use products, right? All of those things, helps us understand how customers are going to derive benefit, or how we understand them to use the product so that they can derive the most benefit that we can then extract value for from a pricing standpoint. So when you think about like professional services, we see firms move from like one size retainers, to like modular service pricing, for individual services. And that kind of change, often can unlock access to new segments, right? That you weren't kind of appealing to before, in a way that doesn't really risk your brand. You're not cheapening it in the eyes of the marketplace, right? So that's when we think about structure, it's incredibly important how you put it together, right? You don't want to just kind of dump everything into one bucket and say, $100, come get it. That's, completely tone deaf. So the third thing is framing. And so how do we present the service, the benefit, the offer? That's about, from my perspective, perceived fairness, right? Whether you show comparisons, are you offering guarantees? Are you confident enough that you can display what your competitors are pricing for, a substitute for your solutions? Each one of those areas is going to really help you build and drive trust improvement with your brand. And so the number, I think it really kind of matters less around the price, that number itself, as opposed to the story that you can kind of wrap around that price, right, at the end of the day. And then, the fourth part is dynamics. And that's, how does the price move over time? I mean, the last thing that you want to do is set it and forget it, right? Pricing is incredibly sensitive to what's going on in the market. It's incredibly sensitive to the relationships that you have, not just with your customers, but with prospects. So you've got to be willing and able to kind of diagnose where there's softness and where your sharp edges are really helping you gain purchase and drive momentum. If you can't establish an understanding about how the price needs to move, you're probably in a deficient position before you even know it. And so, what's an example of some of this? It's like, well, if I think about, should I raise prices? Should I lower prices? I think how you raise prices really tells customers how they should trust you, right? Because if I'm doing it in a scheduled way that's fully transparent, that I've roundly communicated to a user base, a customer base, then those increases can feel earned, right? Especially if I'm able to tell the story, again, that I'm wrapping around that. But surprise hikes, they feel like taxes. And at the end of the day, nobody really likes to do that. And I think if we think about pricing backlash, that's not so much about the change necessarily. It's about the shock. Anytime that you move somebody from a position of understanding price is what you pay, but value is what you get. And if you ever move people off of that spot, it can be increasingly problematic to you from a top line standpoint in a way that pricing created the problem for you as opposed to solving.
Yeah. Gary, I'm really curious as you hear Ray talking through all the different levers of pricing, and we often think about price as just the number, right? And Ray is packing so much more into that. So I'm curious, when you think about going to market with something and price changes, kind of your experience around those things.
The things that also come up, and I'll try to add a little to some of what Ray was talking about. Being empathetic to the state of mind or the needs of the people you're trying to serve. So I like to bring this back to sort of retail environments at times because it's easy to relate and people can stop in someplace and observe for themselves. The folks who go to a dollar store to buy laundry detergent are very different than the folks who go to Costco to buy the same thing. And there's a lot in between. At one end of the spectrum, you may have consumers who are very cash flow conscious, right? They're willing to pay a premium per unit, per ounce, whatever, to manage the cash they have in a specific moment in time. And at the other end, there's this sort of maximization of value. I want the lowest price per ounce. I'm going to buy toilet paper that's in a package so big I need a pickup truck to take it home.
I love this example so much. I can't even tell you. It is part of my daily life with buying laundry detergent in bulk. Proceed.
And the thing is, people think, oh, yeah, that's really trite. But ultimately, you can bring this right back to a business-to-business environment and think about cash flow and think about inventory and think about the model and the capabilities of your business and how you want to be served. So just-in-time inventory and just-in-time delivery is very much like the dollar store shopper. Things are showing up at your dock just when you need them, but you're actually probably going to pay a premium for that level of service versus I'm going to buy in advance and inventory a bunch of stuff. Now, I've tied up cash, in my example, in 4,800 rolls of toilet paper, but the model is one that I think is good for people to think through. Who are we trying to serve? What do they actually value? Because in addition to the discrete monetary price, there are also benefits that are in investments of energy or time. And, the relationship between those currencies is something that I always find to be of incredible curiosity and insight. If I'll ask a client, for example, or when I was running businesses, ask the question, if we were able to guarantee delivery, could we get a price premium? Right. And, that applies for everything from paper clips to jet engine parts. Being on time, being reliable goes right back to some of the trust stuff that Ray was touching on in terms of pricing. And so, I do like to think through those different attributes. I'll stop there because, as I said before, I'm a little bit of a nerd on this, so I can go off in a number of different directions.
So I just want to point out for those of you who are only listening to us, as Gary was talking about 4,800 rolls of toilet paper, I don't know if we were all thinking about the number of rolls of toilet paper we had when COVID started, but I know I had plenty and I never had to worry about having toilet paper because I am that Costco shopper.
Kim may have a whole room in her house dedicated to personal care product
have
inventory.
Something similar to that, yes.
It just made me reflect on the quality of the toilet paper that we had access to during COVID, and I really don't want to go back to that.
And yet we still had to pay a premium at that time. Speaking of pricing, right? At that point, you couldn't get the good toilet paper, but you were still willing to pay a high price for the bad toilet paper, or less effective toilet paper, let's say.
All right.
Back to our regularly scheduled programming. As we think about clients we've done this work with, organizations you've worked with where you're adjusting pricing or considering adjusting pricing, what are some of the pre-adjustment and post-adjustment war stories or success stories?
Yeah. So I think that a couple of things come to mind when I think about this. With clients, I think there tends to be, right, price is the easiest thing to move, right? And so a lot of clients kind of get in their heads that they can discount things and they can kind of just put something on the website, they can make a change, they can get some short-term movement around it. But just because it's the easiest thing to do doesn't make it the best thing to do. And so I feel like the things that really kind of jump to mind when we're talking about this aspect of it is something that we call under signaling, right? And that's when, you've got a valuable product or service, right? That's clearly differentiated, or substantially differentiated and solves a problem really well. It's a good product. And when pricing for that product is under what the market says that it really could command, right? Psychologically, that has an impact on buyers. It has an impact on prospects. And it tends to really degrade the credibility of the brand at the moment that those prices are conveyed and communicated. We had a client that was underpriced relative to what the competition was offering. And its ability to be able to lower its price to try to drive a short-term bump in volume growth, certainly solved a problem within that reporting quarter. But as soon as those customers were up for renewal, shot right up, right? And I've seen it in telecom. I've seen it in packaged goods. I've seen it in consumer entertainment. I've seen it in a number of places that, you always everything's a trade-off, and you're making that trade-off in the near term to spike units for one reason or another, and knowing that you have a retention problem coming at some point in the future. So if churn is going to double, that's not really a good thing, right?
Yeah, that example to me is, all of us listening to this, watching this, those of us in the podcast have done I'm going to do my 2-week free Audible so I can download that one book that I
Exactly.
want to listen to. And then I'm going to cancel before I pay for it, right? Or I'm going to take the 3 months of stars for 99 cents and then cancel it before the price goes up.
Yeah.
So love that example, right?
And it's just worth reiterating that when you're doing things like that, you're changing the complexion of who you are appealing to, right?
Yes.
And so who you had built your business around is now not the group that you're selling to, because you've allowed a bunch of other people in that are really kind of just viewing you as, kind of a discount alternative, as opposed to the problem solver that you are, right? And so I think when you kind of open those doors and you let people in, it creates those churn moments that you have to wrestle with, because now you've got to figure out ways to not let them leave, even if they're not really kind of your core target customer. Once our client kind of could get into the place where it's like, hey, we're just not going to get into that cycle anymore. It's going to be a little bit more painful up front, but in the long run, it's going to be better for us. You reset the pricing, restructure offers, better reflect the value that you represent in the marketplace, and be confident in it, because that's also something that's really important in the dynamics of this, is how much your price reflects everything that you are. And that conveys a degree of confidence that the marketplace does respond to. Your conversion's going to dip when you take prices back up, but at the long run, you're actually much better off for it. So when we think about, like, on one hand, that's under signaling, and then you've got the flip side, right? You've got the other side of that, which is over signaling. And that's basically charging too much for your product, because, you're trying to establish a beachhead, plant a flag somewhere, and drag your business to it. And that's not effective either, because at the end of the road, you're establishing a price point with it's no proof to the market that price is actually worth it. And if you're going to charge a top tier rate and you're not going to provide any evidence that you're differentiated, that you're super capable at solving the problem relative to everybody else, it comes off as arrogant. And that's one of the last things that you want to represent, particularly in a B2C space. But the cure isn't going to be dropping the price. every time that you have this need, you got to add the proof, right? And so if you're going to be on the B2B side, if you're going to be thinking about how I'm going to kind of make this work in a world where I am substantially differently priced from my competitors and I'm over the mark, I need to figure out ways to get people over that hump. How do I get the buyers there? And it's going to be things like success guarantees, leveraging things like helping people frame the understanding of it, right? Being able to offer trials, just thinking about like a variety of tactics that help people land that this isn't I'm making a long-term commitment in a way that's going to really affect my cash flow. This is like, these guys are really confident in what they do. They're priced themselves accordingly. Here's a way I can taste it, right? And then I can, kind of move on. And I think those are a couple really important things.
Gary, I'm curious if you or Ray have any experience with this, but what signal can pricing send when you're bringing a brand new product to market that is new to the market, right? It's not something that has a comparison point.
Well, before we even go there, I just want to applaud Ray for his enthusiasm on this topic. He is continually showing just how exciting pricing can be. It relates back to some of the comments Ray was just making. Familiarity with a category plays a role. And in categories where people are relatively unfamiliar or where they don't pay a lot of attention because the purchases are only occasional, oftentimes the price is an indicator of perceived quality or value. And, what can happen there is, there's an old axiom in marketing: trial is easy, repeat is hard. And if you're selling things that don't necessarily often result in repeat purchases, and think late night television commercials, nonstick cookware type of thing, oftentimes there will be almost ludicrous assertions of price or value, because the business model is, all I need is a one-time purchase from a bunch of people and we've made our money. And if the intention is to build long-term value and vibrancy and resilience for a brand, that's a very bad approach. And so bringing a new product to market, oftentimes the incremental value can be signaled. So when Crest decided not just to be a toothpaste, but to go into teeth whitening, right? Crest White Strips came out at price points that were unheard of for that dental care category. And it was a first foray for a major player to go in. Now, the reality is Procter & Gamble was actually chasing somebody else who had already established a beachhead with that kind of premium pricing. They had a competitor who was out there selling whitening. Rembrandt was the brand, selling whitening as a benefit, which was new to that category. And Rembrandt's foray created an umbrella under which Procter & Gamble could say, hey, there's value left on the table here. People seem to, at least some portion of our audience, seem to appreciate what this other brand is putting to market. And as a leader, we need to go there. And so, I think there are a number of different ways to get into a space and think through what kind of signals are our prices conveying. Another favorite of mine is the guys at Yeti when they came out with $400 coolers, right? They came out with an ice chest that competed with a Coleman cooler, but they made some assertions around performance, how long ice would stay cold in there, but they charged an incredibly high price for that one unit. And oh, by the way, it's a lot heavier than the Coleman cooler that you grew up with. But they created a different arc in terms of price per unit and the value perceived, and focused in on a particular set of consumers who put a lot of emphasis on that particular performance attribute. So you've got people who are going fishing or hunting or whatever. And, there are, and for me, those are the examples where historically categories sort of hypnotize themselves into a set of assumptions around what can be charged, what should be charged, how we all behave. And, we train the people who are buying our product through our pricing and promotional activities, but we also train our competition. And every once in a while, the disruptor shows up and says, I don't know why you guys were acting that way. Look at all this value over here. And, the flip side also happens. So, Ray talked about the challenges of subscription models. The free trial period, get this, and then there's just this huge attrition at the end of the free trial period. I always think of that as a Saturday Night Live skit set in a country club, very posh, and all of a sudden, a new manager of the country club says, hey, we're going to give free trial memberships. And you can just imagine the kinds of characters Saturday Night Live would march through that country club because they're there for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Right? Check out the buffet line. And that sort of dissonance to me is a good example of, as people who are stewards of a brand or an enterprise, think through who you intend to serve, think through what they value, and think through how you maintain that. Because the near-term hit of added quantity sometimes comes at the cost of loss of your core customers. And Ray touched on it, and I think it's one of those things. It's why pricing is such an impressive and sort of captivating topic, because when you start to tease the threads apart, it gets right into who are the people we serve, how well do we know them, how well do they appreciate what we provide, right? There are all these other aspects to the operation of the business that have to be factored in before we set a number or set a model.
So I am still not yet convinced about the nerdiness of pricing. But what I am very curious about is understanding why pricing needs to change in an organization. You both kind of hit on this, right? As you were going through your different examples, I heard undercurrents from both of you of understand why you're doing it before you just go out and change your price on something, whether that's changing it up or down. Sure. Understand your reasons. And so, Ray, curious from your perspective, if there's kind of a set of framework or cadence or things that you recommend as people are considering pricing changes.
Yeah, there are. And if I could distill it, click higher than like what a proposal might look like, because I think it's operative for the conversation. It's really 3 main steps. The first is you've got to diagnose the signal, and you need to be really, really clear about what you're currently selling, how it's constructed, how it's packaged, how it's going to market, the kind of marketing expectations that are being set, right? The brand promise, everything around all that. What kind of story are we already telling about our service and the price that we're charging for it? And the way that we do that is to, go out and actually talk to real live people after we've gotten like super ingrained in the data of who's engaging with what, who's spending what on what, right? How is the revenue in the business generated today? So we have like an inside out view and an outside in view. But it's really important to be able to capture that so that you can compare it to the story that you want to tell, right? Because I think a lot of times customers, our clients, get feedback from what the market is saying the price is telling them today. And our clients want to argue with them about it, right? I mean, it's just a set of quotes. It's a PowerPoint presentation that kind of summarizes what we learned, like these main themes, and they want to argue with us about it. And at the end of the day, it's like, this is what the market's saying. You can't argue with them. You can only change the message that you're sending, right? And so that's what's like really important, knowing how you're being perceived relative to what you want to be perceived as, and then making all of the credible investments to kind of steer the ship in that direction, right? Because the gap between those two things is where your opportunity lies, right? And so if it's really close what the market thinks to where you are, you're doing great. If the market thinks something wildly different about you, well, then that helps you diagnose, if I were to make these changes, then this is really what the market opportunity that is in front of me. Customer interviews, like I said, understanding what's driving kind of win-loss rates, sales channel feedback, right? Even Trustpilot reviews, being able to just understand in a multidimensional fashion, like how that's shaping up. So that's diagnosing the signal. The second thing is kind of design the mechanism, right? So this goes back to a little bit of the 4 parts that I mentioned earlier. We've got to be able to identify in what people are using today and how they're spending their money, how they're choosing to engage with you. And when they're choosing to pick a substitute instead of you, what are the ways in which you should be structuring your offer so that you create a better surface to engage with the marketplace, right? So instead of trying to shove a square peg into a round hole, you figure out how to knock some of those edges on the square peg off so you can fit in the round hole a little bit better. It's a rough analogy, but I like to use it. So how do we do that? Well, some of the ways is by analyzing how in the world people are using those things and try to help the clients make the best use of that information. But it's also about, again, talking to the marketplace and trying to understand what a variety of compositions and packages and tiers and things, what that would necessarily mean in terms of their willingness to engage and make a purchase, right? So ultimately driving us towards an understanding of willingness to pay and how that changes. If it's a one size fits all versus a 3-tiered good, better, best approach that has a nice staggered stair-step approach to get you from an opening price point to a premium price, and you're fitting yourself across the demand curve in multiple spots, that kind of a design is one that wins. But you've got to be smart in how you do it. And there's a lot of expertise that goes into making sure that you don't fold in mistakes and judgment and expectations versus exactly what the market's saying you should be doing. So that's step 2. Step 3 is deploy and monitor. And so once we've made those changes, right, and we've gotten them out, we've communicated them effectively, we've earned the right to change the price, right? And we've done it in a very transparent fashion. We are going to do it as a result of having piloted and understood how people are going to react to it and how they're going to use it. We're not just going to understand what's going on from a revenue standpoint, right? We're going to go beyond just that. We're going to understand a lot of the trust metrics. We want to be able to squeeze out from our understanding what's win rates looking like. I've just created all these new tiers. Are we immensely more successful in places that surprise us? And why is that? And then am I having to discount in order to maintain volume and revenue? Is that a market driven thing, or is that a psychology driven thing on the client side that we need to address that? And so if we can maintain high perceived fairness and confidence that our product and service is going to work, then you're going to have cut to the chase in a lot of really productive ways. And I think those 3 main steps are, absolutely crucial to being able to navigate this effectively.
Love that. I'll pile on a little bit with maybe not so much the technical sort of aspects of here's how you want to price, but as is a habit of mine, I'll think through the stakeholders who are involved and what problems you want to solve and what role your product or service offer plays for them. So there are times when, give a specific example, leading personal care brand was being competed down on price to the end consumer by a couple of retailers who felt that it was a destination item. So retailer X would promote, retailer Y would match, and they ratcheted down the price on the shelf to the point where each of them was losing money on every unit they sold. But because it was a leading brand, they couldn't pull it off the shelf. So they started then nipping away at the fringes of that brand's business proposition. Reduced display activity, taking the slower moving items off shelf and giving them to alternate brands, starting to reduce their presence in store. They knew they had to hold on to the brands to legitimize their category offer, but they tried to also minimize how many of those units they sold. At that point, the brand team looked at this and said, we got to find a way to put profit back into the pockets of our retailers. And there are a lot of different ways of doing that. The first is probably, just discount your product, find cost reductions and discount it. There's another way to do it, which is to say, hey, let's come out with new product and set new price points. And the idea of thinking through what needs to happen to get to where you want to be and how you can serve the needs of your end users and all the people that basically pass the baton between you and that end user is crucial. In that particular instance, one of the major retailers, a senior vice president, went to leadership of the supplying brand and said, I'll never say this in public, but we need you to charge us more for this because we can use that as a lever to pass something along and put some money back in our pocket. Because otherwise your brand is going to lose, and over time you'll see degradation in your market share. It was a really fruitful and very open discussion, and it can apply in different areas. It doesn't have to be packaged goods. As you think about anybody out there who's selling through a dealer network, right? How many competitive offers sit on the show floor of your dealership? What are they priced at? Why are they there? What is it that your dealers might think they're not getting from you? And how might you help them? And this comes back to price point and offer packaging and a whole bunch of other things. But the consideration, not just of the technical or details of pricing in your model, but also how it will be perceived and how the stakeholders that ultimately serve your end user act on what you do with pricing is also important, because I think we've all experienced clients who tried discounting and had their distributors or dealers or retail outlets say, thank you very much, put it in their pocket and not change anything else. So ultimately, they didn't move more units. They didn't gain market share. They didn't increase a lot of value. They, maybe discounted and then just gave money to somebody in between them and the end user. So the dynamics of the business feel less profitable, but not at a greater scale. And that's a problem. So I'll pause there because, again, I could probably go on for another couple hours, and I'm sure Ray could. We're going to have to buy a coffee and trade more war stories.
Yeah.
I mean, you've moved me this much closer to being a pricing nerd, but not quite there yet. I'm going to take us into a quick little lightning round and ask you to each give a quick being the operative word example here as we head into wrap up for our listeners. So, Gary, we're going to start with you. What is one pricing myth?
One pricing myth: that the price you charge is immovable. It is entirely feasible to retrain your stakeholders, your consumers, by creating a sense of fairness and trust through your pricing. So you may pull back on discounting, but you may add value through enhanced product performance. And the idea that you're trapped into a price is one of the greatest myths. And this, I touched on it earlier, this self-hypnosis that happens either between competitors or within an organization. Just ask yourself, how valuable is what we provide? And are we keeping the transaction with the people we serve in that fairness bracket?
Turn into a different question for you. What is one of the most overlooked pricing metrics?
There's a lot, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be win rate by a category, or, in a lot of service businesses, tiers of service. You think about like kind of bundled services in a, in a business that sells subscriptions and provides access to benefits in a variety of packages. Being able to understand just how much demand exists based on the number of conversations that your sales teams may be having, that's happening on your web channels, through your customer service, whatever. If you think about like a AAA kind of auto club, those kinds of things, I think that's being able to understand the demand for a variety of tiers and then how much you're effectively selling against that demand is really, really important. And of course, price has a lot to play into it, but being able to understand that it's more than just that's affecting your win rate, and to take a multi-dimensional view at what success will look like in driving that close rate, that win rate up, is incredibly important.
Thank you both. Here's some of what I heard from the two of you today as you helped move me into pricing nerdiness. Make sure you understand why you're changing your pricing. Make sure you're measuring the impact and know that you're not locked in to your price changes. You can make future adjustments as needed. I'm going to send it over to Gary. Take us on home, Gary.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. Another great discussion today here on the Fault Line, CMG Consulting's podcast. If you can, check us out on any platform where you get your podcasts, or just follow us on LinkedIn. We always post there, and we'd love to hear from you. Comments are welcome. And until next time, this is Kim and our special guest Ray and myself, Gary, saying thanks again for listening.